Welcome to another edition of Asian Founders and Funders, where we introduce the brightest minds and most interesting entrepreneurs and funders throughout Asia. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur and senior lecturer of entrepreneurship at VinUniversity in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is Chrystie Dao, Managing Director of Vietnam Silicon Valley Foundation. Chrystie, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Marc, for having me.
So, Chrystie, let's start off with you telling us about your professional background and how you got to the point where you are right now.
Sure. So my career started as a banker. So I joined Merrill Lynch as as a graduate out of university, and I progressed my career and stayed within banking. So after Merrill's, I joined other global banks, and then moved to London with HSBC and ended up staying in London for 7 years, and which then the journey took me back to Australia, Sydney, where I'm from. And then I continued in banking for another 5 years in Sydney. And then I decided to give entrepreneurship a try. So I moved to Singapore in 2016 and founded a fintech in Singapore, and it's a payments management platform. And then a couple of years later, I exited the operational side of that business, and I got into more consulting work and became independent consultant for other payment companies, and also ended up with Visa in their consulting arm. And so I ran what they call the sellers practice for Asia Pacific. So it's really looking at, how do we leverage the data at Visa have, and then be able to support banks, payment gateways with understanding and understanding customer profiles to the end level. So then then COVID hit, and then I started another tech company, and this was in AI. And this is basically from my knowledge and time spent at Visa, whereby I found that a lot of companies for example, Google would have a lot of data and be able to understand the customer profile when they come on to website, to browse, to understand their customer journey online, but there was nobody doing offline. So, for example, if you are Zara, and Zara didn't have the in-depth information in terms of who was the custom profile that entered the store, and which store, and what time, and what they buy, and what was the demographics, was it male, female, and then how they buy and what they buy. So the company was really looking at understanding customer profile in store by leveraging the CCTV footages in store, and be able to then predict the customer behaviors on that basis. So I then went on to wanted to build up my tech team in Hanoi, or in Vietnam in particular, and I came back to build up, to find tech talent. But what I didn't bargain for was the opportunity to be part of something much bigger, and that was to help build the thriving startup ecosystem in Vietnam. So I joined Vietnam Silicon Valley, which is Vietnam's premier and oldest VC incubator and accelerator. And so now I run the foundation side, which is really focusing on how we actually help social impact startups in Vietnam build their business, scale, and also fundraise.
And so why did you take that role as managing director of the foundation?
For me, I'm ethnically Vietnamese, and although I was brought up in the West and lived abroad most of my life, I felt, a spiritual awakening to come back to Vietnam. But I was very clear that when I come back to Vietnam, it was me contributing and really supporting women and children in Vietnam. That was my cause, and that's my passion. And I found that their foundation was much more aligned to my values in terms of helping women, championing women's commercial, commercial aspirations and to help them to grow and develop their business ideas, to become fearless and building up businesses, because Vietnamese women are very entrepreneurial, right? And really helping them to shape and to help, carry on that journey or that aspiration. And children, it's really looking at, grassroots level, at education level, to change and help build a much more creative education system to help Vietnamese children also become very creative in the way that we look and solve problems going forward. And so that was very much something very personal to me. Hence I joined the foundation.
And so how's the foundation financially supported?
So we are privately owned. So we are supported basically from our own projects that we run. So we work a lot with the Vietnamese government. So what does that mean? It means that there was a mandate by the Vietnamese Prime Minister that each of the province in Vietnam would have to be self-sufficient in terms of being able to develop their own startup ecosystem to enable the ecosystem to thrive on its own. And then they needed a lot of help in terms of how do they go about doing that. And that's why VSB Foundation gets involved. We get involved to help educate the government about venture investing. Then we help them set a fund, which will then invest in their local startup ecosystem. So when I talk about these provinces, I'm talking about tier 2 and tier 3 cities, so the provinces outside of the main cities, such as Ho Chi Minh City, Hanoi, and Da Nang. So it's more further out provinces and cities.
So how do you help entrepreneurs through education and introducing them to funding sources?
So we do this through our acceleration program. So we run acceleration programs, and we do that. There's many sources that we look at funding. So it could be our own funds, or we work with other intergovernmental agencies in Vietnam, because there's quite a few number of NGOs and social enterprise organizations based in Hanoi. And that's really trying to solve a lot of social causes such as climate change, recycling, pollution, energy efficiency, renewable energy projects. So there is funding available from offshore and from the European Commission or other agencies, and it's really our role is really connecting the dots and be able to run a program that put these startups through what are called startup school, and then be able to take them on a roadshow and curate the right investors who will be interested in investing in that kind of all those kind of projects.
Is the West recognizing Vietnam as a place to put their money as opposed to just Singapore and China?
I think there's, it is on the rise, but there's still quite a lot of work that needs to be done. So investors outside of Asia Pac region are still not well versed about Vietnam and the opportunities in Vietnam. But you have the big aid agencies like USAID, UNDP, GIZ, climate initiatives. Those guys who are very well versed about the story of Vietnam and the opportunities here. So one of my job is to really go and present the opportunities in Vietnam, to promote some of the exciting projects that are happening here and the opportunities that are available in Vietnam. So and increasingly Vietnam is appearing in the news, and it's interesting facts like Vietnam is probably one of the highest the highest growth GDP rates in the last few years, globally. So it is getting a lot of traction right now, and and given the fact that there's quite a number of interesting projects in Vietnam from a social impact perspective, that's given rise to quite a lot of interest here. But I think it will take some time for investors to feel a lot more comfortable to invest in Vietnam.
Now that you're back in Vietnam, what's your take on the country's entrepreneurial promise?
Um, I think there is still quite a lot of work to be done here. I think that, the education system itself kind of like lends itself to very much, to come out of, to get a very good education. Vietnamese people are, as a population, highly educated. But what happens is we get sort of boxed in terms of parents' expectations for us to go and work for somebody else, right? To get a great job working for a large corporate, like Google, Meta, and those guys, or banks, or to work for the government. It's never encouraged to work for yourself. So that's why I think, as the education system changes with, people are more wanting to and be taught how to take risks and to be accepting of taking risks and to fail, right? So I think failure is something that is still not a well accepted concept in Vietnam. So the more we accept failures and the more we take risks, the more an entrepreneurship kind of environment, we will spur that entrepreneurship environment in Vietnam. But I am seeing quite a lot of interesting, young people going up there. And what I see is like a lot of Vietnamese young folks and even older folks have a second job, like a side hustle, like a second or third side hustle. So as a culture, we're very entrepreneurial, right? Mindset. But it's like, how do you then take that into something much bigger?
So you talked about this a little bit or alluded to it. How can high schools and universities support the entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Um, I think it's about, as I mentioned, going back to grassroots, and it's really injecting um creativity in the curriculum. It's not all about your ABCs. It's not all about, all the maths and the science and become the top student. It's about using your left brain to be creative, to try something that you never tried before, to be a much more well-rounded person, to experience art, to appreciate art. Art, and I don't mean just what a piece of art on the wall, but creative art like drama and acting and then singing and playing an instrument, and also injecting more, as I mentioned, curriculum that allows the student to think outside the box and to make mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes, to try things that they've never done before, not follow a certain path all the time.
What industries do you think are going to take off here in Vietnam? I mean, especially now that you're hearing so many companies like Intel are increasing they're going to build more factories here. Boeing's increasing. A lot of companies see Vietnam as a safe place to do business. So, what industries do you think are going to take off here, and what kind of entrepreneurial focuses should people have to take advantage of these big companies who are expanding here?
Um, what industries? I mean, it's interesting you ask that because like technology is always a big thing in Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam's known for IT outsourcing, right? As a place that you go to find tech talent. And increasingly, I'm seeing that Vietnam is positioning itself as the center of excellence for AI experts or expertise or talent. We're churning a lot of AI experts from universities. So tech is definitely, but then we need tech as a baseline for a lot of industries, right? So I see technology being the base, AI. I think a lot of companies are looking at data centers, setting up data centers in Vietnam. So data is becoming much more interesting because I mean, from data you can know a lot about the customer, customer profile, how to run businesses, and that's basically a very important tool to have, right? Data, and be able to convert to data and and make sense of what that data is, because data is just data. It's just how to interpret data and to make it something into something meaningful. So, another point you mentioned is manufacturing. Yes, Vietnam has become, the recipient of a lot of manufacturing opportunities. Factories being set up in Vietnam as a shift from China, right? So, you see, jobs in manufacturing, engineering is another big piece. But I think increasingly there's a lot more social impact. I keep harping on social impact because I think this is where uh, people are looking to. Vietnam is big in agriculture, right? There's a lot of opportunities in terms of agriculture, and smart farming using IoT or using, AI to spur on, smart farming. You look at climate change initiatives in Vietnam because Vietnam is will be heavily impacted by climate change. There's like a lot of carbon uh, um, credit activities and projects that are being looked at right now. So it's a mix of things, but I think technology and I will be probably the biggest impact here.
So you were an entrepreneur yourself before, and what was the most difficult thing about being starting a venture yourself, and how has that helped you relate to the entrepreneurs that you work with?
Yeah, so I mean, starting a business is always hard. I mean, for me, I've come from an entrepreneurial family, so my parents ran many businesses, more SME businesses in Australia. So I grew up understanding how hard it is, but unless you do it yourself, you never know how difficult it is. And being that I was, a banker, international banker for over 20 years, I was very lucky to have a corporate kind of brand behind me, but when you step out of the corporate brand and the corporate structure, you find yourself having to rely on yourself to do lots of different things. So you become the jack of all trades because you become the CEO, the COO, their operations, the legal counsel, the operations manager, everything, right? So you just have to learn how to be dependent and to be resourceful. And that's one of the key things that I learned is become resourceful, ask for help, leverage your network, and build a community around you to support you, not just especially mentally as well, because which is really difficult because you get burnt out very quickly if you're not careful because it's your baby, so you want to protect it, you want to build it, and sometimes you forget that you need to look after yourself. Otherwise you just get sick and burnt out, and you're starting to hate the business itself the business that you created in the first place.
Is work-life balance even possible as an entrepreneur, especially in the beginning?
No, that doesn't even is not part of the equation. So you just have to decide, what is more important that day. It's on a daily basis.
I've actually interviewed entrepreneurs who said, "I wish I never did it." Now I'm too far along and I've got to see it through and the company's successful. But when I think about how much of my life I've given up to the company, I caution entrepreneurs that this is what the entrepreneurs I've interviewed said, really think twice about this before you decide you're going to go and do it.
Mm. Yes, but then
Um,
you would
wh-
never know, right?
yeah, of course, not until you actually do it. What are the skills that aspiring entrepreneurs need today?
For me, I think it's grit, it's resilience, and as I mentioned, being resourceful and really building that strong, being able to build that network, but also communication is really key to be able to tell your story of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And because it comes through as passion, investors, people, shareholders, uh, company, well, employees and partners want to work with you because they see the passion, that when you light up, when you talk about your business, and therefore they want to be part of it, right?
Yeah, and so that leads me to what are investors looking for in entrepreneurs they are investing in? And do people in Asia look at entrepreneurs differently than they do in the West?
Um, it depends, because that's an interesting question because I mean investors naturally look for entrepreneurs who would be able to, as I mentioned, having those qualities like grit, resilience, to see it through and be able to be agile because you need to move with, the situation, right? And to be flexible. So these are the qualities I think, investors are looking for, and for somebody who has and being a team player is very important as well, right? Because you start off as your own business, but as you build the team, it's like, how do you become a team player? How do you become that leader that people want to follow you, right? And that comes with being understanding yourself and humility. Humility is a big thing that I see, right? I mean, you look at the most successful CEOs and entrepreneurs in the world, they are so humble, right? They walk into a room and you never know they are that millionaire or billionaire that's made it, right? Because they're just your next door neighbor, that kind of person. So humility is a really cool, big thing in my opinion.
I think you're right. A lot of the successful entrepreneurs I've interviewed, and I just interviewed the founder of GoDaddy, whose net
Mm-mm,
worth is over 3 billion.
mm.
And you could see yourself sitting at a sports bar next to him watching a game. You would just
Yeah,
never know that he was worth $3 billion. The way he talks, he
exactly.
carries himself, and
Mm,
how he
yep.
tells his story, everything.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm.
why is sustainability one of your focuses?
Sister, I've loved this space because I just feel that, you know, um, I personally believe that doing nothing is not an option right now, right? I mean, the world is changing, we need to preserve Mother Earth for future generations, right? I mean, we haven't been kind to Mother Earth, and I think now it's time to look at how do we rebuild, how do we make up for some of the stuff that we've done, and it's like there are so many different things to, basic things like be conscious of the way that you travel, you work, you buy, right? And it's just extending this place for generations because our future generations need and should have an opportunity to enjoy it, the natural resources. So for me, that's why I want to give back. I want to rebuild, and I want to be able to keep and to make it a better place.
In my year here, I would say 80% of the young entrepreneurs are women. Every event I go to, even when you've been a judge at our events, basically they're women. Even my former dean asked me when I told him about how women are so dominant here, and even in my classroom, he asked me to encourage more men to become entrepreneurs. I need to really work on them. What's your
Mm.
take on that? Like, why is Vietnam like this? And I heard a woman from South Korea runs one of the enterprise centers there said Vietnam is unique in that way that you just don't see the large number of women entrepreneurs, and there's no glass ceiling for them here in Vietnam. Why is the culture like that?
I think I, for me, it's interesting because I haven't lived in Vietnam, right, for many years. I mean, I left when I was a very young child, so I have never, experienced that. But I know it's a culture. We're very entrepreneurial, like women. Like I take my mother, for example. My mom, she's basically the backbone of our family, right? My dad will come with the ideas, but my mom is the one that executes, and she ensures that the business run, and she's, and she has the foresight to see things. And I think Vietnamese women are expected to do many things. We're expected to, look after our husbands, be a good wife, be a good mother, look after the family, feed the family, and be able to work and bring home some money. So we've always had to be quite resourceful, think about how we're going to, and be able to multitask, right? And I think that's innate in our culture as well, that we're just not a what would they call it, one trick pony, so we're expected to do multifaceted tasks at the same time.
And women are very mature in Asia in general. I think more mature than men for all the reasons you've just said, that they're saddled with responsibility at a very young age, and there's a very high expectation of them. And then on top of it, now they're more and more running companies at Vingroup. Practically all of the companies, the CEOs are all women, all the vice chair are women in a society that typically have been dominated by men. So it really is a vast improvement. How can large companies help startups?
That is through, the way I look at it is large corporates normally have, if I look at from a social enterprise perspective, they'll have a CSR program, right? So that CSR program allows them to connect with startups, but also, corporates would experience problems in their organizations, right? And this is where we see ourselves like accelerators will come in the middle, and to be able to work with corporates, understanding what the problem statements are, what the mission are. And then instead of having to hire, their own team to solve those problems, they can work with startups who are creative in their thinking, could already come up with some ideas to how to solve those problems, and be able to collaborate at a much, earlier stage, so that so startups don't have to continue to figure out, is this problem a real problem that I'm trying to solve? Is there product market fit for my organization, right? So it's about having someone in the middle to connect what corporates are looking to achieve, because they may not have access to the startups themselves. But it's really working with a middle organization like an accelerator, like somebody like BSV, who kind of like work with startups, and we also work with large corporates as well. So we kind of know what they're looking to achieve, what some of the issues that they face within the corporate structure, and then having somebody agile here on the left hand side, which are startups looking to solve those problems. So it's building what I call the buyers and sellers platform, right? So the buyers would be the corporates, and the sellers would be the startups, right? Because startups are looking for customers to sell, right? And corporates are looking somewhere to buy that solution, but they don't know where to find that. And it's really working with this connected party that will connect the two by building a platform that sits like a platform in the middle.
How is the funding ecosystem in Vietnam to support the entrepreneurial system here?
You see, there is, quite a few local funds here in Vietnam, in terms of supporting the startups and entrepreneurs in Vietnam, but it's still a lot more work to be done. There is still not a lot of incentives for foreign funds to come and set up a fund to invest in Vietnam, right? So which then limits the amount of funding that is available for startups in Vietnam. So which has increasingly become a bottleneck and a challenge. So that's why you're seeing Vietnamese companies or startups increasingly moving to set up their operation in Singapore, so that they can access funding from investors in Singapore or others. Because as you see, Singapore is now becoming a major investment hub, right?
Oh yeah.
There's quite a lot of money there, but it's just how do they access the startups in Vietnam, right? So this is something that I think, personally, I think and we've been openly talking about that as an investor community, that there still needs to be much more work, support by the Vietnamese government to promote, to entice easier investment of or the setup of funds from overseas into Vietnam, and be able to take money out of Vietnam. That's one of the main things, right?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. For mentorship here, how can people who have experience here share that experience with entrepreneurs, which will accelerate the growth here?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there is uh, a bit of a mismatch, I'd say, in terms of, yes, we're churning out, a lot of smart graduates or interns from university, but then they want to go into a startup world, right? So there is probably not a very clear roadmap or a path for them to work with startups, even in second or third year, a formal program that is. I mean, a lot of students will know their friends or neighbors or friends of friends who has a startup, and then they kind of like informally go down that path. But there's not being like a sort of a formal program that sort of shifts or pushes the interns, or sorry, the grads, the second year grads, to start testing out the waters if startup life is for them, right? So there is still work to be done, but it's definitely something that is super interesting to be looked at, and to set up in Vietnam.
Are there magazines, books, and podcasts on business that you would recommend to entrepreneurs?
Podcasts, I mean, there's many podcasts. I mean, there's so many out there. Books, I mean, again, there's a lot of business books. I don't have any particular ones. I tend to read autobiographies. For me, it's like me learning from people's story, like how they did things, and how they've overcome their personal challenges. Which, for me, I personally, I get a lot of joy and enjoyment out of reading autobiographies, from very, successful entrepreneurs, uh, those CEOs in the past. I read a lot of books about how to become, really good CEO, and just learn from those people.
How could the government be more supportive of entrepreneurs?
Um, that's a good question. I mean, I, first of all, there is a lack of funding in Vietnam, for startups and entrepreneurs. Unlike other, Asian countries, for example, Korea. Korea is super supportive of their startup ecosystem. They run lots of programs. They work with a lot of accelerators globally to encourage, Koreans, South Koreans, to set up startups, or and then support them through programs to fund them, to give them some money to kick off the programs, and to take them offshore working. For example, if I'm a startup, I can apply, and if I want to expand into Vietnam, I would apply through the Vietnamese program. If I wanted to go to the US, I apply through the US program, right? So they work with many accelerators, accelerators, in many countries, to allow those startups to test bed those ideas, and then take them back to Korea to build the next Samsung, to build the next LG, right?
For entrepreneurs in Vietnam that would like to work more with you and your organization, how can they reach out to you?
Sure. I mean, they can, happy for them to contact me directly, through your podcast. And would love to hear from, entrepreneurs, or people who are very keen to explore this journey, or to look at an internship with us, especially within the social impact space. This is something very dear to my heart, and this is something that I really want to build out a team to really, go back and then teach the younger generation. And it's just regeneration, right? It's why I call it circle of life. We build on and we help the younger, and then from them, that it just creates knowledge base, and to support each other as part of a growing community.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time, and we're so glad you decided to come back to Vietnam and to help spur and encourage more entrepreneurship here. And as the Economist predicts that Vietnam will be the fastest growing economy over the next decade. And so the opportunities are in abundance here. So we're glad that you're back and that you can help with this.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me.